Hello my fellow builders and welcome back to the channel. I know it's been a while since the last video dropped, so I'm just going to jump straight into it. This is the master grade Jinx, the 603T, and as you notice, we're doing this thing a little bit out of order. Normally I would have already had this built and I would save any building portion toward the end, but I started this kit 2 years ago and I just stopped halfway through the legs. Reason why? I actually wanted to light it up. So I had to take some time off and do a lot of research on how to do that. And after a lot of research, a lot of trial and error here and there, I finally got the parts that I needed to get to light this thing up properly. The most difficult portion was the GN drive, and I'm going to explain that portion later in the video. But right now, this is just a portion to see how it would all line up if it was going to be wired up and lit with a few details added, which I did off screen. Unfortunately, I did lose some footage in the process of making this, transferring this from my phone to my laptop. The data became corrupted, so the best parts, the pièce de résistance, if you will, was unfortunately lost. So I will not be able to show how I got the GN drive to be lit, but I will be able to explain it to you in certain parts of the video moving forward. So this portion right here, I just wanted to see how it would all come together if I had the wiring done properly and a few details added and see how it really stacked up. And honestly, I was quite impressed with it, but I knew that I had to do a lot of work to get it stand worthy, to get it shelf worthy. So as you look here, yeah, I mean, it looks great. The kit definitely was a phenomenal kit. It was fun to build, but it's a little plain Jane on the terms of detail. The gray and the white is really kind of one note. So I decided to saturate it up, give it some pre-shading, and I learned a few new techniques. The first thing I wanted to tackle was actually lengthening the beam sabers. I've always been a little disappointed with the length of the hilts of the beam sabers, so I figured, you know what, let me try to learn a new skill. So I enhanced one beam saber as a test. Now I'm going to show you guys exactly what I did. The first thing you're going to need is some pla plate, about 1 millimeter thick. Then you're going to need a manual Dremel. I used the 1.5, or it's like the 0.8. No, it was the 1.5 millimeter Dremel. A hobby saw, which I got from Gundam Planet over in New Jersey. Some brass rods had to get those from Amazon. Some nippers. You're also going to need a vise, some plastic cement, and also some Madworks glue. So first things first, clamp it down in the vise. Just get that in there nice and snug. It's not going to go, so it doesn't go anywhere while you're working it. I did make a couple of mistakes in this process, mind you, but I was able to correct them along the way. Then, using the already pre-established groove on the beam saber, I just used that as a marking point to identify how much I wanted to cut off. Then I took my triangular file and I just rough sanded it down so that it was even. Once I did that, I took the exact dimensions of how thick the pla plate was, and it's about 0.9 millimeters using my trusty dusty calipers. Then I just cut off a couple of small segments of it and then stacked them together. But before I stacked them, I also sanded them down with a sanding stick, a foam sanding stick, just to make sure that the glue would adhere to each other from one side to the other. 600, 800 grit will do the job just fine. It doesn't have to be rough, and actually I think it's better that it's just fine rather than rough, because you actually might cause more problems. After that, I applied the Tamiya cement, and I had to do that very quickly because this isn't the right cement that I wanted to use, but it got the job done. So I had to do a couple of applications of it and then apply it sandwich the pieces very quickly. And then I stuck them in the vise for about a minute or two because it does dry quickly. Once that was dry, okay, so here's my first mistake. I forgot to draw an X across the sanded area of where I cut off the piece of the pommel. But it was okay. I was able to correct it off screen so that it was actually even, because the hilt ended up being just slightly crooked, and I'm a little OCD about those things. But I was still able to correct it, sand it down a little bit here and there, and it wasn't a big deal. Once I got the hilt done, I had to redo, at this point, what is called the pommel piece, what could be described as the pommel. And I did the same thing. Again, I forgot to draw the X to get it dead center in the middle. And it was okay, it was fine. I used the 1.5 millimeter diameter manual drill bit for this. And I just took my time. Again, this process is very simple, but also somewhat delicate. So if your intent is to actually enhance a piece like this, even though it's a very simple piece, you do not want to rush this process. Okay. After that, took the brass rods, 1 millimeter. So it was 1.5 millimeter on the Dremel bit, but that's okay. It gives me a little bit of wiggle room to actually move from side to side, but the glue that I'll be using will be able to actually keep it in place. So with the two pieces of plate stacked on top of each other, it's just about 2 millimeters. So what I ended up doing was just measuring about 2.9, 2.4 I ended up measuring about 3 millimeters out, just so I could have a little bit of extra space. Because you can always take stuff off, but you can't add it back. So you have to be careful with that. Don't worry, I didn't lose that rod. And then I just did a test fit to see how the pommel piece would actually fit. So now that I was happy with that, took the same Dremel, drilled a hole right through the middle of the 2 pieces of gray plastic that I glued together. And then sandwiched it all down. Make sure it was nice and clean. You don't want any excess plastic in there. Yeah, and please be careful when dealing with these rods, because even though that rod wasn't sharp or anything like that, I did end up poking myself, and I did hurt myself a little bit. Now, as you can see here, I actually had a little bit too much of the brass rod on there, so I had to cut it down just a smidgen. But it got the job done. And now we're going on to the next step, which is to actually glue it in place. Let me just make sure that make sure you're 100% certain that you're okay with it, because here's the deal. It's not an exact science. Next, once I put it back in the vice grip, I use the MadWorks black glue and the wooden part of a one-sided Q-tip so that the glue can be moved around. This glue does dry fairly quickly, but it does recommend that you at least take 10 minutes to let it dry completely. I let it dry for about an hour. After that, you take the nippers and you just snip it off all the excess. Just go around in a circle, keep it as even as possible. Yeah, it's gonna look ugly at first, but that's when your files come in. So I did my triangular file first. Just rough sand that all the way down, just hog off as much material as possible. And then I took a 180 grit sanding stick. And yes, I know that was a bit abrasive on that. You know, what about all the details and whatnot? But you know what? That's fine. I could go back in and rescribe in all the details because I had a picture of it. But fortunately, there really weren't very many details there. So I don't feel like I really lost out. And once I got done with the 180 sanding stick, I took a sanding sponge. I believe that is 800. And now we have a comparison. It is literally 2 millimeters longer. I was happy with that. I was very happy with that. But then I realized later on I had to actually put on a gray pommel top to kind of really go with the look. I want it for. So I did that I did that off screen. Now, initially I was going to go with a kind of blood orange paint job for certain parts of this, but after a couple of tests, I decided to go with a more of a gorish red to go with the GN drive particles that this kit emits, that this mobile suit emits, because I felt it fit the dynamic a lot better. The blood orange was way too contrasting, and I didn't like it, so I switched it up to a gore red. And then I added some gray accents on parts of the armor, along with some scribing that I, unfortunately, like I said, I lost some of the footage. So a lot of the techniques I learned this time around, guys, I really wanted to show you, but again, I apologize. I lost the footage due to data corruption. If you're going to be filming on your phone, make sure that you have a very suitable USB drive, because I got a drive from a third party. It's a terabyte drive, and I got it from a third-party seller, and it did not live up to the expectations. Just about every picture and video, about 2/3 of the picture and video I put on that drive became corrupted. So I had to go back to my old tried and true method of uploading it to a Dropbox. But ultimately, I added more gray details to the armor and to make it really more dynamic and break up the white. There was just a lot of white and a lot of gray, and I needed to be a little bit more lively. So I was very pleased with the pre-shading, which is going to bring me to my next point. Pre-shading this time around, much easier. And here's what I did. Normally I use a black primer, and then I go in. Normally I use a white primer or a gray primer, and then I go back with a dark pre-shading color, like say a deep sea blue, or even black, or in some cases brown if I'm doing reds or anything like that. I didn't have to do that this time around. I actually just went with the primer first, and then I went with the main color that I was going to be using, and I let the primer do the work. I didn't have to go back and do a second color to get the shade that I wanted. So I was very pleased with the end results on that. Now, as you see here, I'm adding red to the GN condensers on the legs and the elbow joints of the grunts of the Jinx. And first and foremost, I did clean up after myself. It doesn't look like it here, that just looks like water. But that is actually mostly water with a little bit of paint thinner, so that I did clean up after myself. It's not there anymore. I went back and cleaned it up a second time, then I top coated it, and it was fine. I chose this because I wanted to make it look like the GN particles from the Tau drive were actually flowing through the mobile suit itself. It gives it, and I felt it gave it a more menacing appearance. Because if you looked at Gundam 00 Season 1, when these suits first appear, they look they're gray. They're definitely menacing. They're definitely hardcore, but the problem is they're a little bit plain Jane when it comes to color and color and paint scheme presence. So this is why I chose to do that. I wanted to make it look a little bit more menacing than it actually already is, and I think I succeeded with that here. And again, the black primer really did a lot of the lifting. So all I had to do with the gray parts in the armor was actually just go back and be a little bit more concentrated in certain areas and just let the naturalness of the black primer, the metal look, actually do the job that I intended to do from the jump. And I definitely succeeded that here. So again, black primer, it's not necessary to do. If it's going to be like a neutral color like a gray, you don't necessarily need to do anything underneath on top of it. You don't need to do a third layer. So this is basically maybe 2.5 layers, technically speaking. And it really cut down a lot of paint time. And I had been working on this kit for about 4 months. I did go in and hand paint certain details silver, a nice little accent color to break up the gray, the white, and the red, and the black. And it just made it a lot more dynamic looking. There were certain parts of the GN drive, however, I did not paint due to some difficulties in making sure that this whole thing was secure and not having excess friction. So the GN drive, with the exception of the cone piece and one external metallic gray piece, metallic gunmetal piece, is largely unpainted, but you won't see it because it's actually going to be locked in place inside the main body of the Jinx. For those of you that are curious what kind of paint that I use, I prefer to use lacquer paints. Lacquer paints are much more easy for me to use. However, in some instances, I will use acrylics. Acrylics with the correct thinner will be just fine. But I felt the lacquer paints, especially with this particular brand, is a little bit more scratch resistant. I'm using splash paints that's made here in the US. Definitely follow them on Instagram. Splash Paints Incorporated, I think is what it's called. And yeah, their stuff is amazing. I can't say enough about them. So if you guys have a chance, give them a shout. As far as my LEDs go, I typically get my LEDs from 2 locations. Now this is the part I was telling you about. If you look here, you see where how the wires are routed. I had to take my display Dremel, electric Dremel, and mill a hole through it. Yes, I know I shouldn't have done that technically because it would melt the plastic, but that plastic was so unbelievably dense. And then I had to hollow out the area where you see the wires being pushed into, so that the same cables for the GN drive could also be routed. Now, if you see that wire hanging out in front of the head, that is actually it is a loose wire. It's a loose LED, but that LED is to light up the purple section in the chest independently. The GN drive housing is a lot bigger in this kit than in other kits. So like the Exia and the Curios and the Dynamis and the Virtue, the GN drives for them are actually smaller. The GN drive Tau, the ones with the red GN particles from Gundam 00, those are actually a touch bigger. And also I believe this kit is about as old as the Master Grade Exia. So there really isn't a whole lot of consistency between the two of them. I actually tried to take the GN drive from the Master Grade Curios and put that in here to see how well it fit, and it didn't fit at all. It was actually way too small. It's about maybe a quarter to maybe 3/8 of an inch too small. So it didn't fit. But what I took to light the GN drive up, for those of you that are curious, go to evandesigns.com and look up Knight Rider LED. The Knight Rider LED. And for those of you who know what Knight Rider is, yeah, we're talking about the lights from that car from way back in the 80s. I used that to light up the LED, so it looks like the GN drive is actually active. And I thought, and you guys, I think you guys are gonna be blown away with it when you guys see the GN drive in action. But all I have to say about this kit is that this kit definitely pushed me out of my comfort zone. It was extremely challenging. This grunt suit in particular is not like your standard grunt suit. It's not like a Leo. It's not like an Ares, or what's another grunt suit? Goodness. It's not like the Tieran or the Union flag or anything like that. No, this kit is, I would say it definitely has a lot of shelf presence, and I would say it's worth the buy. However, I would caution you against having it stand up. I would say a stand is recommended. Actually, I would implore you to get a stand for this one, because the ankles are kind of like in a 2-stage system. Like there's the ankles and then there's the shin. There's a joint in the shin area, which I didn't think made a lot of sense. but you know, it is what it is. So I recommend getting an action base for this kit, a flexible one if you can find one. You can probably find those on Amazon. But I learned so much from this kit. And if you're looking for something to take you out of your comfort zone, I highly recommend it. Give it a try, get an action base for it. Decals for it, they do exist. This thing does come with dry transfers, but I didn't use those. I opted to use decals that I got off eBay. And this kit's been sitting in my backlog for like 2.5 years. So I had everything. I just needed to get the light situation done. But all I gotta say is, my fellow builders, thank you for bearing with me. Thank you to all the new subscribers to the channel, all the new followers on Instagram and TikTok. You guys have made this channel what it is. I greatly appreciate your patience. More is coming. Just life has been lifing. So while you're building, make sure you poke your head up. Do it with love, do it with care, and have fun. And as always, keep building.